What if the very definition of an all-powerful God is mathematically impossible? Not unlikely, not mysterious, impossible. Think about it. We all know what a square circle is, or a married bachelor, or a number that's both even and odd at the same time. The words sound fine on their own, but the moment you put them together, they collapse into nonsense. They don't describe reality, they describe contradictions. And what if the God of philosophy, the so-called all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good deity, is built on the very same kind of contradiction? For centuries, we've been told that God is the most solid idea imaginable, the foundation of truth, the anchor of morality, the bedrock of existence itself. But here's the shocking truth. When you actually examine this definition, not as poetry, not as theology, but with the same tools of reason and mathematics that built modern science, the whole concept begins to unravel. This isn't about personal opinion. It isn't about faith. It isn't about whether religion brings people comfort. It's about coherence, about whether the very idea of an all-powerful God makes sense in the first place. And once you see the logic laid out step by step, once you follow the proof to its conclusion, you'll discover that omnipotence isn't just hard to imagine. It's incoherent, self-destructive, a fatal flaw hiding at the core of the definition itself. By the end of this journey, you won't just hear an argument. You'll witness a demonstration, a mathematical case that shows why the God defined as all-powerful doesn't just lack evidence. He collapses under his own definition. The proof begins now. For as long as human beings have asked the deepest questions, where did everything come from? Why is there something instead of nothing? What is the ultimate foundation of reality? The answer offered, again and again, has been one word: God. But not just any God. Not a tribal deity with a temper. Not a local spirit of wind or water. Philosophers wanted something bigger, something universal, something perfect. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, René Descartes in the 17th, and Gottfried Leibniz not long after, all worked to refine this idea. They weren't just defending faith. They were building what they believed was a logical framework, a God who was not vague or mythological, but rigorous, precise, unshakable. And over time, their definitions crystallized into what we now call the omni triad. 3 absolute properties, 3 qualities that together define the God of classical philosophy and theology. First, omnipotence. God is all-powerful, able to do anything and everything. No force, no barrier, no rival can limit him. Second, omniscience. God is all-knowing. Every fact, every possibility, every detail of past, present, and future is already within his perfect awareness. Nothing can be hidden from his mind. And third, omnibenevolence. God is all good, not just morally flawless, but the very standard of goodness itself, perfectly loving, perfectly just, incapable of deception, cruelty, or corruption. These 3 qualities together became the bedrock of classical theism. They are not add-ons, they are essential. Take away omnipotence, and you may have a powerful being, but not the creator of all things. Take away omniscience, and you may have a clever architect, but not the ultimate mind. Take away omnibenevolence, and you may have a mighty ruler, but not a being worthy of worship. Only when all 3 exist together, omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, do you have the God that Aquinas, Descartes, and Leibniz were describing. The God billions are told to believe in. the God who stands as the foundation of Western philosophy and theology. But here's where the trouble begins. Because while each property sounds impressive on its own, when you set them side by side and ask how they interact, they begin to collapse. What looks like perfection starts to reveal contradiction. And the first property, the cornerstone of them all, is power, omnipotence. If omnipotence fails, the rest falls with it. So let's put omnipotence on trial. Not with opinion, not with faith, but with the cold, unforgiving tools of mathematics. When people first imagine God, the image that comes most naturally to mind is power, infinite power, power without limits, the power to create, destroy, command, and control everything in existence. This is the essence of omnipotence, the claim that God is all-powerful, able to do anything, no restrictions, no exceptions. But the moment we take that definition seriously, a devastating problem appears. It arrives in the form of a deceptively simple question. Can God create a stone so heavy that he himself cannot lift it? At first, it sounds like a riddle for children, a word game, something you might laugh off. But look closer, because this isn't a joke. It's a formal logical dilemma. Let's call the proposition P. P is equal to God can create a stone he cannot lift. Now, two possibilities exist. Either P is true or P is false. If P is true, if God can create such a stone, then by definition, he cannot lift it. There is something he cannot do, and therefore, he is not omnipotent. If P is false, if God cannot create such a stone, then again, there is something he cannot do. And once more, he is not omnipotent. Both answers collapse the very concept they were supposed to defend. This isn't a clever trick. It's a demonstration of logical incoherence. To say God is omnipotent is like saying someone is a married bachelor, or that they have drawn a square circle. The words look meaningful, but they describe nothing that can exist. And the stone paradox is only the beginning. Ask the same question in different forms. Can God create a rule he cannot break? If yes, then he is bound by that rule and therefore not all-powerful. If no, then there is something he cannot do, and again, he is not all-powerful. Can God make himself not know something? If yes, then he is no longer all-knowing. If no, then he cannot perform the task, and his power is limited. Can God limit his own power? If yes, then he ceases to be omnipotent. If no, then there is something he cannot do. Again, a limit. No matter how you phrase it, no matter which branch you take, the contradiction is unavoidable. Let's imagine this in mathematical form. A truth table with two columns, yes and no. Every question about omnipotence splits into these two outcomes. And at the end of both columns, the result is the same: contradiction. Omnipotence collapses. It's like trying to add 1 to infinity. You might think you've made something larger. Plus 1. But mathematically, infinity plus 1 is still infinity. It isn't bigger. It isn't more. It's nonsense mathematics. The same is true of omnipotence. It looks impressive as a word. It feels grand and unshakable. But the moment you test it against logic, it collapses into absurdity. This isn't an attack from the outside. It's a failure from within. The definition of omnipotence cannot survive its own weight. And if omnipotence fails, then the God defined by it fails as well. But defenders of faith have not ignored this problem. For centuries, theologians and apologists have struggled to rescue omnipotence from collapse. They've offered answers, escape hatches, redefinitions, And yet, as we'll see, each defense only deepens the contradiction. The case against omnipotence is just beginning. When confronted with the contradictions of omnipotence, believers and apologists don't stay silent. They respond. They offer defenses. They propose ways out of the trap. But here's the problem. Every so-called escape hatch collapses under its own weight. Let's look at the three most common ones. The first is this: God can do the logically impossible. On the surface, this feels like a solution. It says, yes, God can create square circles. Yes, God can make married bachelors. Yes, God can create a stone he cannot lift because he is beyond logic. But think about what this really means. If God can do the logically impossible, then logic no longer applies to him. And if logic no longer applies, then every definition we've ever given of God disintegrates. We say God is good, but goodness is a logical concept. If logic doesn't bind him, then the word good is meaningless. We say God is all-knowing, but knowledge itself is defined by logic, facts, truths, categories. If logic collapses, knowledge collapses with it. We say God is powerful, but power is only meaningful in relation to rules, limits, and consistency. Without logic, even power has no definition. A God beyond logic is not a God we can describe, not a God we can worship, not even a God we can talk about. He becomes a blank, a void, a word without content. So this first escape hatch doesn't save God. It detonates the entire framework of theology. The second response is this: logic is human-made. God transcends it. Again, it sounds humble. It suggests that our reasoning is too small, too limited to grasp his ways, that human categories don't apply to the infinite. But once again, notice what this does. If logic is human-made, then nothing we say about God can be trusted. To call him good, meaningless. To call him just, meaningless. To call him merciful, powerful, wise, all meaningless. Because every one of those concepts relies on logic, on definitions, on the ability to distinguish one thing from another. If you abandon logic, you abandon every definition of God at the same time. And once more, the concept dissolves. The third and final move is this: omnipotence only means doing what is logically possible. This one sounds more sophisticated. It tries to redefine omnipotence not as all things, but as all possible things. So no square circles, no contradictions, just absolute mastery of what is logically possible. But here's the fatal problem. If God is limited to what is logically possible, then he is limited. By definition, there are things he cannot do. And if there are things he cannot do, then he is not omnipotent. It's like saying someone is free, except for the things they're not allowed to do. Or that someone is infinite, except for the boundaries they cannot cross. The definition undermines itself. And here's the ultimate point. Every one of these defenses, beyond logic, transcending logic, restricted to logic, abandons the very thing that gave God his definition in the first place. If you say logic doesn't apply, then you can't meaningfully say God is good, powerful, or knowing. If you say logic does apply, then omnipotence collapses. Either way, the result is the same. The definition fails. And if the word omnipotence has no content, then the God defined by it has no coherence. So the escape hatches don't rescue God. They bury him. Which brings us to the next step. If omnipotence fails, how does that failure look when written out formally? What does the mathematics of collapse actually show us? That's what we'll uncover next. Let's now take omnipotence out of the realm of word games and place it directly into the language of mathematics. Define O as omnipotence. O, keter, the ability to do all things. On the surface, that sounds clear. All things, every action, no limits. But here's where the problem begins. Because the set of all things doesn't just contain possible actions, it also contains impossible ones. Think about it. All things would have to include creating a square circle, drawing a four-sided triangle, making 1 + 1 = 3, and yes, creating a stone so heavy he cannot lift it. These aren't extraordinary feats. They're contradictions. They are descriptions of nothing at all. So if O, ability to do all things, and the set of all things includes contradictions, then O demands the ability to perform the impossible. But performing the impossible is incoherent. It's nonsense. It's like asking for the color green to weigh 30 pounds. The request itself is broken. So what happens when you build O on this foundation? The set of actions collapses. O doesn't describe infinity. It describes emptiness. Formally, we can express it this way. O, keter, all possible actions, plus all impossible actions. But because impossible actions are incoherent, the entire set becomes undefined. And in mathematics, an undefined set reduces to the empty set. O, ha. In other words, omnipotence equals nothing. Let's visualize it another way. Imagine a Venn diagram with two circles. One circle contains possible actions. The other contains all actions. If you equate them, you're forced to include impossible actions inside the second circle. But impossible actions don't overlap with anything. They live in a void. They break the system. The result is that the two circles cannot merge. They contradict each other. And the set of all actions collapses into incoherence. This isn't a trick of definitions. It's a basic rule of logic and math. If a set contains contradictions, it self-destructs. Imagine an equation. 2 + 2 = 5. Not just wrong, but impossible. Once you allow it, the entire structure of arithmetic collapses. No calculation is safe. No result is reliable. The same is true with omnipotence. Once you allow contradictions into the definition, the entire concept breaks. Omnipotence becomes mathematically undefined. And here's the crucial point. This isn't about what God does or doesn't choose to do. It isn't about miracles, or creation, or power over the universe. It's about whether the word itself, the definition itself, makes sense at all. And the mathematics says it doesn't. Omnipotence is not a vast infinity of power. It's an empty set. It reduces to nothing. Now, let's step back and consider what that means. If omnipotence collapses mathematically, then the omni triad collapses with it. Because omnipotence isn't optional. It's the cornerstone. Take it away, and you don't just weaken the definition of God, you erase it. This is why the collapse of omnipotence is so devastating. It doesn't leave us with a smaller God. It leaves us with no God at all. And this is not a matter of faith versus doubt. It's not atheism versus theism. It's mathematics versus contradiction. Reason versus incoherence. Omnipotence isn't just unlikely. It isn't just questionable. It is mathematically undefined, which means the God built on it is mathematically impossible. But that raises a haunting question. If omnipotence is incoherent, then what does that say about the world we actually see? A world of suffering, pain, unanswered prayers, and silence. That's where we turn next. Because the collapse of omnipotence doesn't just happen on paper. It happens in reality, It happens in life, and its consequences are everywhere. So far, we've been working in the realm of logic and mathematics. We've shown that omnipotence, when defined as the ability to do all things, collapses into contradiction. But let's step outside the proof for a moment. Let's look at the world we actually live in. Because if omnipotence is incoherent on paper, its collapse is even more devastating in reality. Here's why this matters. The God of philosophy is not just any God. He isn't defined by myths, or rituals, or cultural traditions. He is defined by the omni triad: omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence. Take away omnipotence, and the entire triad fails. Because without infinite power, you cannot guarantee infinite goodness. Without power, knowledge and morality become irrelevant. And when we test this definition against reality, the cracks are impossible to ignore. Take the problem of evil. If God is all-powerful, he could stop every act of suffering instantly. If he is all-knowing, he would see every evil before it happened. If he is all-good, he would want to stop it. And yet, evil exists, not in rare corners, but everywhere. Wars that kill millions, genocides that erase entire peoples, diseases that rot the bodies of children, earthquakes and tsunamis that wipe out families in seconds. If God cannot stop these things, then he is not omnipotent. If he chooses not to stop them, then he is not omnibenevolent. Either way, the omni triad fails. Now consider divine hiddenness. If God is omniscient, he would know exactly how to reveal himself to every human being in a way they could understand. If he is omnibenevolent, he would want to do this, because every soul would matter. If he is omnipotent, he could do it instantly. And yet, what do we see? Entire cultures with no knowledge of this God. Sincere seekers who cry out for a sign and hear only silence. Billions of people who live and die without ever encountering the undeniable presence of God. If God cannot make himself known, he is not omnipotent. If he will not, he is not good. Again, the triad collapses. And the consequences are not just theoretical. They are human. They are visceral. Think of the Holocaust. 6 million Jews murdered, while prayers rose to heaven unanswered. If God could not stop it, he lacked power. If he chose not to stop it, he lacked goodness. Think of a child with bone cancer, screaming in agony, praying for relief that never comes. If God cannot heal the child, he is not omnipotent. If he will not, he is not benevolent. Think of every whispered prayer over hospital beds, every desperate cry in the middle of tragedy, every silence that follows. Each moment points to the same contradiction. So here is the unavoidable truth. If omnipotence is incoherent, then the God of philosophy cannot exist, because that God is defined by power without limit, and without it, the entire system collapses. This isn't just a mathematical failure. It's a moral failure. It's an existential failure. It's a failure written in human history, in human suffering, and in human silence. And that failure brings us to the most painful realization of all. The contradiction isn't only in logic, it's in life, and it touches every single one of us. But we're not done yet. Because if omnipotence is impossible, what happens to those who build their lives on the belief that it's true? The collapse of omnipotence isn't just a puzzle for philosophers. It isn't just a debate for classrooms or theology halls. It has real consequences, human consequences, and some of them are devastating. Consider faith healing. Across the world, parents have let their children die because they believed God's power would heal them. No doctors, no medicine, just prayer. Time after time, the results are tragic. Children with treatable illnesses suffer and die, while their parents kneel beside the bed, begging an omnipotent God to intervene. But he never does. And when the child is gone, how do the parents make sense of it? Some blame themselves. Maybe their faith wasn't strong enough. Maybe they prayed the wrong way. The guilt eats them alive. Others double down. They say, it must have been God's will. But what kind of will demands the death of a child when the cure was within reach? Now think about fatalism, the belief that God is in control. How many times have we heard those words? It sounds comforting. It sounds peaceful. But in practice, it often justifies inaction. Climate change, God is in control. War and violence, God is in control. A pandemic sweeping through cities, God is in control. When omnipotence becomes the answer to everything, responsibility evaporates. People stop acting. They stop fighting. They stop fixing what is broken because they believe an all-powerful being already has it covered. And then there's the psychological cost. Believers are told, pray, and God will answer. But when the answer never comes, what happens? For some, it's crushing guilt. They wonder what they did wrong. They wonder if they were unworthy, if their faith was too small, if God was punishing them. For others, it's despair. The silence feels like abandonment, like crying out in the dark and hearing nothing in return. These are not small wounds. They shape lives. They destroy trust. They leave scars that last for decades. And all of it, every death from faith healing, every crisis ignored in the name of God's control, every believer left broken by silence, flows from the belief in omnipotence. This is why the contradiction isn't just theoretical. It's lethal. Because when you build your life on a definition that cannot stand, sooner or later, it collapses. And when it collapses, people suffer. But there is another side to this, a side most people don't expect. Because when you finally let go of the illusion of omnipotence, you don't fall into despair. You fall into freedom. At first glance, the collapse of omnipotence might feel heavy. It might feel bleak, like the foundation of the universe has been ripped away. But here's the truth. This isn't bad news. It's good news. Because if omnipotence is incoherent, if the God of philosophy collapses under his own definition, then we are free. Free from the illusion of divine control. Free from the fear that every tragedy is part of some cruel test. Free from the guilt of thinking unanswered prayers are our fault. We are not pawns in a cosmic game. We are not subjects under a tyrant whose power we cannot question. We are human beings. And responsibility for the world rests in our hands. That's not a burden. That's an opportunity. It means morality doesn't have to be built on fear of punishment or hope of reward. It can be built on empathy, on compassion, on reason. It means suffering is not a mystery we must endure in silence. It's a challenge we can confront together through science, through medicine, through solidarity. When a child is sick, we don't need to wait for a miracle. We can be the miracle. When disaster strikes, we don't shrug and say God is in control. We take control. We act. We rebuild. And when we search for meaning, we don't have to beg for it from the sky. We can create it here, in the love we give, in the truth we seek, in the progress we build. This is not a loss. It's liberation. Because when the contradictions fall away, what's left is clarity. What's left is responsibility. What's left is the power of humanity itself. And that power, rooted in reason and compassion, is brighter, stronger, and more reliable than any divine contradiction could ever be. So let's follow reason. Let's follow empathy. Let's follow truth. Because reason and compassion are better guides than divine contradictions ever were. We've now walked through the case step by step. Omnipotence isn't just difficult to defend. It isn't just mysterious. It is incoherent. And if omnipotence collapses, the God of philosophy collapses with it. Because without power, without limits, the omni triad cannot stand. And the God billions are told to believe in cannot exist. But this journey doesn't end with me. It continues with you. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever prayed and heard only silence? Have you ever wrestled with the idea of an all-powerful God in a world filled with suffering? Share your experiences in the comments because your voice matters. And let's keep this conversation going. What other contradictions should we explore next? Which arguments have you heard that deserve to be put to the test of logic? Because this was only one piece of the puzzle. In the next video, we'll uncover another devastating paradox, one that hides in plain sight. The fatal tension between free will and God's perfect foreknowledge. Until then, follow reason, seek truth, and never be afraid to ask the questions that matter most.